When me and my family first moved over to Los Angeles from Mexico, most of the houses we could afford were in the Compton area. So we looked around until we found this yellow, decrepit looking house that was a decent sized and pretty affordable. The owners were two sisters who were in their mid-70s to 80s. Before the purchase was made, I asked them about a picture of them with another woman. They told me that the other woman was their other sister, who had very bad hallucinations and was put into a mental hospital. I found that quite unnerving, but just went along with my parents' excitement and happy to finally have a true home. After a few weeks of getting settled in, a woman who no one knew would come by and just stand outside of our gate and just look at the house. One day, my mom invited her in for some coffee, and that's when she explained that she was the sister who was put in the mental hospital and that she was let go for good progress and behavior. After that, she became pretty close with my family and soon became like a good family friend. But in the following years, we noticed she started coming by less and less, until one night when everyone was asleep, I woke up to my brother in my bed shaking me. When I asked him what was wrong, he whispered to me, "There is a witch outside of the window." I told him to stop being dumb, and that's when he told me he had to cover the window with the curtains. Then we heard banging on our window and followed up by a smash. Now at the time we had half of the window covered up by our mirror so that no one would be able to get in. But we saw this so-called witch trying to get in, and we noticed she had a knife in her hand. It wasn't until I saw her face that I grabbed my brother and I ran with him to my parents' room. My dad thought we were being stupid until he heard screaming. She was yelling at the top of her lungs, "Get the fuck out of my house, you fucking beaners, I'm gonna kill you." My dad then grabbed his gun and shot a bullet into the window. He yelled that if she tries anything, he won't hesitate to blow her head off. My mom called the cops and we waited. They arrived in 10 minutes and they found her in the bushes waiting for us to get out. When they arrested her, we realized that it was the sister who was in the hospital. We also found out she was covered in blood from killing one of the neighbor's dogs. To this day, I have realized that maybe she was starting to have hallucinations again and must have thought her old house still belonged to her. After that, we ended up moving to a small house in Downey. But if there's one thing that I will never forget, it was her face. She looked not only out of it, but completely insane. This is a bit of a long story. There are three of us. We'll call them Nate, Brandon, and Jay. I'm Nate, and the story will be told from my perspective of the experience. So it's the beginning of the 9th grade. School started about 2 weeks ago. It's early September, so it's a Friday night. My friend Brandon and I were extremely bored just sitting at his house playing Halo Reach and Super Smash Bros. Melee. So it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Neither of our parents were home. Mine were on a business trip. His just worked really late. So we headed on our bikes to get Subway sandwiches for dinner and bike around the neighborhood for a little bit, seeing if some of our other friends can hang out. We end up giving up and going back to Brandon's house around 7 p.m. and I get a call from my friend Jay, who goes to a different school, asking if Brandon and I wanted to go sleep over at his place that night. We said yes, and we were happy we had something to do. So Brandon got his stuff together, stopped by my house to feed the cat and grab my stuff for the sleepover, then headed over to Jay's house. We get to Jay's house, we go swimming in Jay's pool, play basketball, Xbox, street hockey, you know the stuff teenagers do. We had a great time. So then I remember I had some coupons for buy one get one free shakes from Sonic in my wallet. For any of you who don't know, Sonic is a drive-in restaurant that has amazing shakes. So we decide to bike on over there. It's about a 5-mile bike ride, and by the time we get there, it's 11:15 p.m. And this wasn't one of the Sonics open 24/7. This one closes at 11:30 p.m. So we arrived just in time to get 2 medium banana shakes and 1 medium caramel shake. So we hang out and get the shakes, and it was about 11:25, and Jay's dad texted us that we needed to be back by 1:45, which was far past curfew for our age. So we had over an hour till we needed to be back, so we decided to bike along the trails and around the neighborhood. First mistake. It was actually a pretty calm night, actually pretty relaxing. It was a good temperature, cool 60 or 65 degrees, and a nice breeze. So as we're riding around the paths, we end up accidentally making a wrong turn. Second mistake. After 20 or 30 minutes of biking, we realize we are completely lost in a forest, so we stop. Third mistake. So after we stop, we turn on our flashlights on our cell phones to look around the forest to see if we recognize the area. As we're looking around, Brendan turns around and screams as his light shows up on 3 or 4 men with nightmare-inducing facial expressions. Jay and I look back, we scream. The scary men scream and they let out a freaky laugh. And we take off on our bikes as fast as our legs could carry us. We were never 100% sure if they chased us or not, but we were going too fast to notice and we didn't want to risk slowing down to look back and have a chance of getting caught by them. As we get out of the forest on the streets, we pass a traffic light and the street sign said Route 55, which was almost 10 miles away from our house, and we didn't know how we ventured out that far, but at least we knew how to get home from there. The only words that were uttered from us till we got back to Jay's house were, "Turn left here." We didn't see any cars on the road on the ride home, so we assumed that if they were following us, that we lost them. Every time a car passed by, we were worried it was them, but as we got closer and closer to the house, we saw less and less cars. Jay lived on a street that went up a hill and had a cul-de-sac on the top of the hill. Most of the houses were pitch black on the street. When we got home, we immediately checked to make sure all the doors and windows were locked just in case. We then scrambled upstairs to Jay's room and sat in a circle on the floor in complete silence. Then Brandon broke the silence by saying, "Nate, Jay, what the hell just happened?" The 3 of us are still really good friends to this day. We never saw the people we saw in the woods that night again. It's been a few years since then, but one thing's for sure, the 3 of us will never forget that experience. Before I begin my story, I'd like to say that I'm a male and I'm also in high school. On Fridays after school, my friends and I usually go to Starbucks just to have fun and mess around a bit. However, during this time, my friends had plans of their own, leaving me to hang out by myself and drink my coffee alone. About an hour into my relaxation, my mom had called to meet me at Starbucks to hang out and talk about usual things that a mother and son would typically talk about. By the time she arrived, things were pretty crazy. The weather was beginning to turn ugly and a lot of people were rushing inside to get warm food and drinks. One of the people, a very well-dressed lady, sat right next to my mom and I. She began saying something like, "You guys can come to my house and get $1 million," or she would say, "You guys get an A+. From the sound of it, we could easily tell she was mentally ill, so we decided just to go with the music and play along with the conversation she was having with us. About a few minutes in, shit started to get pretty crazy. The lady began talking about how she used to be a teacher and that she was fired from her job because someone tried to murder her. The way she talked about this was really disturbing. Eventually, she left without a trace and we hadn't seen her for a while. About a few days later, one of my friends and I were hanging around the same area and spotted the lady talking to people. She said the same crap to me and my friend, but we took it in a kind gesture, only because we knew how to deal with her. We decide to chill for a bit when we see cop cars pull up near the downtown grill. Apparently the lady had gone in and started saying to some young girl that she was the chosen one, and that she was going to her house to get $1 million. The lady was said to also act violent towards the employees serving food, usually pacing towards them in an aggressive manner. The police dealt with her and are taking the lady to a mental facility. All I know is that she was mentally ill, and even though she seemed harmless and would hopefully never hurt anyone, it was still disturbingly eerie to know what was going through her head. I grew up in a house with most of my family, which a lot of them claimed was haunted, but until my late childhood, I never believed a word. Until the night I fell asleep in my mom's bed. To start, I'm an adult now, in my late 20s. I live with my wife-to-be in Canada. The story I want to tell happened when I was 9, I think, and I've never really talked about it. It's not terrifying, but super creepy. My family moved a lot within my city when I was a kid. It was my mom, my grandma, my baby sister, and me. My mom worked nights, she's a nurse, and normally wasn't home until 8 or 9 in the morning. My grandma at the time was in remission from lung cancer. She was an insomniac, so even though she had a room, she normally stayed up in the living room watching late night Law and Order reruns. Anyways, on this night my mom agreed to let me fall asleep in her room, as young kids are allowed to do. She had a pretty comfortable bed, and my grandma was in the living room as usual if I needed anything. I was pretty tired, so I fell asleep pretty fast. I should probably mention I'm a hard sleeper. My family jokes that I sleep through a hurricane. I've never had night terrors or anything like that, which makes this harder to explain rationally. My mom went to work right after I went to bed, gone for the night to her job. I could hear the Law and Order theme playing as I dozed off, so I knew where my grandma was. I slept pretty well until I woke up to a sudden, heavy weight at the end of the bed. My eyes flashed open quickly, but at first I wasn't too worried, as I thought maybe my grams was coming to check in on me and rub my back, grandma kind of stuff, until I heard her cough from the living room. I froze, my head under the covers, refusing to move them. Thoughts running, was my mom home early? No, if it was my mom, she would move closer or lay down beside me, not sit at the end of the bed, seemingly just staring at me, no words. Was it my little sister sneaking out of her room to sleep in my mom's bedroom? No, the weight was too much, too heavy, like a grown adult. Then I started to feel uneasy, unsafe. The weight wasn't moving, just felt like it was sitting there, watching me, knowing I was awake and could sense it there. I wasn't willing to move. I barely breathed just to hope it would go away, but it didn't. For what seemed like hours, but was probably mere minutes, the standoff continued, me hiding under the covers, it sitting there. Stoic, unnerving, intimidating, until finally the weight lifted and went away, taking the sense of dread with it. I was feeling drained and exhausted, and that led to me finally blacking out back into the safety of sleep, waking up just in time to hear my mom come in the front door. This story has a semi-long intro, so please bear with me. In the year 2013, I was a sophomore in high school in Southern California. I had earlier that year moved to a city called Menifee, which is mainly a suburb for the working folk in the Riverside County. Anyways, while I was a new kid, I was still able to make a couple of friends pretty quickly. I'm changing their names for anonymity reasons. Let's call them Bradley, Jacob, and Austin. Bradley being my closest friend among the three to this day. I remember it being on a Friday during that year's fall season. They all happened to live on a cul-de-sac, which was about over 1.5 miles from where I lived. Since my neighborhood consisted of elderly people, I usually spent my time over at theirs, at around noon till late the very morning the next day. Well, the day of my story's occurrence happened to be one of those days. Frankly, I don't remember what actually we did that day. All I remember was since it was a Friday, my mom allowed me to stay out later. When the time reached around midnight, my mom texted me and told me to come home as she was going to sleep. I would have asked my friends if their parents could give me a ride home, but unfortunately they were all fast asleep and I didn't want to bug my friends by asking if I could sleep over, so I gave my friends a farewell and headed home. 5 minutes into my journey, I actually didn't mind having to walk. The air was nice and cool, and I always loved the night sky. Between me and my friends' homes, there was an elementary school with a wide green flat park right next to it. The park having no lights and being totally pitch black. I was about to pass the park when I noticed a man sitting on a bench near the corner of the park, close to me, about 100 feet away. I couldn't really see his face, but could decipher that he was a tall, bald, white guy in a black hoodie and shorts. Besides glancing at him once and taking in all those details about him, I didn't really pay much attention to him and continued on my way. I just kept walking forward, occasionally glancing at my phone for no particular reason. When I neared the lamppost near the sidewalk I was traveling on, I noticed that when I looked down in front of me, a second shadow opposite to mine was casted. I instantly thought it was someone else, that guy I'd seen earlier most likely being the caster. I quickened my pace while trying not to make it too obvious to get some distance between me and whoever was behind me. Now, some people probably wouldn't mind or care if they had to share the sidewalk with a stranger, but since it was late at night and I'm a pretty scrawny guy, I didn't want to risk getting mugged. Eventually, I decided to cross the street. I looked both ways for cars, but obviously it was to see who was behind me, and sure enough, it was the same man. It was a little brighter due to there being lampposts, and I quickly got another look at him. He was built and about 6 feet tall. After I crossed, I continued down my same route, but shortly after, I noticed that the guy had also crossed the street and was once again right behind me. Okay, now I was starting to really freak out as my heart began to beat faster. Up ahead, the street, which connected into my neighborhood, was within sight. At first, I felt relieved, but then I realized that I didn't want the guy to follow me home and know where I lived. Instead of turning into my street, I continued walking forward until I approached another street coming off the main road. I quickly sped up and turned in, and once I knew I was a little out of sight, I began to jog away quickly. When I was like 100 yards away from the mouth of the street, I twisted my head around to clarify if the man had continued following me. He was, and not just following, he was full on sprinting. And at that moment I decided, fuck it, and also began to sprint away. I didn't even know where I was running at that point, or which new street I was running into. I just had to get away. After running for a while, I ended up thinking of the idea to run to the side of the house that actually had 2 trash bins next to it. I laid flat on my belly and faced the street. Luckily for me, I had been wearing a black jacket, so hopefully I was able to blend into the darkness around me. I laid there for a minute when this guy happened to stop running on the sidewalk near where I was laying. He stood there and scanned the area around him really fast. My heart stopped when he looked my way. When he couldn't see me, he continued running in the direction he'd been facing. I waited there for 5 more minutes so that he would be long gone. Afterwards, I bolted straight home, but it still took me half an hour. I never told my parents about that experience since we had finally settled in and I had made my own group of friends and didn't want to risk moving again. The event itself slowly faded from my mind until recently. My only precaution was to never walk home at that time again. I never found out who that guy was, but in the years following, I discovered that in the early 2000s, the local high school had a neo-Nazi problem, but had since been rooted out. I'm not positive that's why he ran after me, but it does seem possible that a white supremacist wouldn't mind roughing up a smaller Latino in the middle of the night with no one else around.